everybody, it's Knight here once again, and I'm coming back with another rather kind of unique toy review. If you don't know, which I'm fairly sure most of you won't, I've actually been getting a little bit more into anime recently. There's Gundam stuff in the background, but what I'm talking about is some of the more recent stuff that's been coming out, because one of my favorite works from a long time ago that I actually read like at least a couple years ago before I saw the anime, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is actually becoming an anime, which is old news to most of you. But for someone like me who's only read the manga and played the games, it's like, whoa, this stuff is finally coming on the TV and it looks pretty good. But that's not really all that important, because what I'm talking about is this figure right here, the Medicos Super Action Statue Kakyoin Noriaki, or Noriaki Kakyoin for you English-speaking people. From, of course, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Part 3, Stardust Crusaders. Now, one of the big reasons why I got this figure is that I've played the game on PlayStation, what's the name? Heritage for the Future, and I was introduced to this type of figure by my good friend and on YouTube, Both Can Fly, aka RJ. So I'm going to be blowing up his channel right here on the screen, just so that you can go check him out, give him some support, give him a subscriber too, help him reach an all-time new height with his subscriber count. So that's all great. But yeah, so because of all these influences, I was convinced to pick up this guy for a fairly cheap price. So yeah, that's basically the backstory behind the packaging, of course, or behind the figure. Of course, the packaging is all there, so it's nothing really all that special. A quick little comparison between some other types of articulated figures. Let's take a look at Ultra Act and SH Figuarts, and it does look a little bit different. So let's just get on to looking at the packaging. One of the things that you have to notice about the Super Action Statue packaging is the fact that it actually looks a lot more premium than some of Bandai's offerings, because we have the embossed letters on the sides, Kakyoin Noriaki or Kakyoin Tenmei, whichever pronunciation you prefer. It's Chinese words, but the Japanese stole them, so it's like whatever. The SAS logo is down here. I'm guessing that's Chozo Kado, but my Japanese isn't A+ right now. Jojo no Kimyo na Boken, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure from Lucky Land Communications, and Hirohiko Araki, based on his direction and his color scheme. On the side, we have, of course, emblazed JoJo and Kakyoin doing his signature pose from when he was fighting Grey Fly, where he says "Soul Kana." On the other side is the exact same photo. On the top, it's another batch of emblazoned JoJo letters, and Chozo Kado, or Super Action Statue, and the name. And on the back, we have a few possible poses. Now, if you hear there's a little bit of rumbling going on inside the box, that is to be expected, because some of the packaging designs in on this toy are actually pretty awful. But we have Kakyoin Noriaki, or Noriaki Kakyoin Super Action Statue. Instead of being like in SH Figuarts, where we have all sorts of words to try and sell you that it's cool and hip and all that, and we have copyright information on the bottom, which is I'm not a big fan of that. Same thing with the Ultra Acts. Right here they actually have they have one line of advertisement, which is that the opposable revolution is starting with Super Action Statue. But what they have down here, which I'm not going to bother to read to you because it's not furigana, so I can't read the kanji, but it's a quick little poem about the character and how his role is in the story, alongside a quick blurb to describe what the character is like. We have some stats down here, which don't really matter in the slightest, because I don't believe these are actually scaled to each other. And finally, we have a little bit of an information about how Chrono's Gear Super Action Statues also have the same stand, and they're all compatible. None of that is very important. On the bottom is the barcode design. I'm fairly certain that 4,200 yen down there is actually the price. Of course, I am not entirely sure, because this is the same thing as the Bandai type of UPC codes where they actually do tell you the price. Not on here though. But yeah, that's the thing out of the way. Let's get the box open. The box actually isn't taped whatsoever, which in my opinion actually does feel a little bit cheap, but then again, the tape is actually a little bit distracting in that it actually breaks up the nice aesthetics of the box. So let's take a look at Kakyoin's coffin, because he dies. Spoilers. The entire box is actually 2 trays. The top is a tray and the bottom is a tray containing instructions and a stand, which is actually something that I feel like, you know, other companies should be able to do. Now, I do understand why Bandai doesn't really do a lot with their figures and doesn't put in a lot of stands, because they have separately sold stands, but I do wish that they would follow Medicos' example and start packaging figures with more stands. On the top, of course, is Kakyoin himself, with a little bit of plastic wrap on the back and for the additional head. Now, there is a little bit of plastic wrap that I had removed on the figure prior to this review, which is the plastic wrap surrounding his mid-torso right here, because it was actually jammed into the joint, and it was gonna be, you know, something bad was gonna happen if I do remove it and try to jam it back in. So I did not. But it's a nice tray, if not a little bit flimsy with how the plastic construction is. Down here we have the plastic baggies that I had cut open for the instructions and the stand, which we will get to in a little bit later. I'm not a fan of the fact that the stand and the instructions are in cut open baggies, because I feel like that damages the collector's value for open figures. It's not very collector friendly, and I would have preferred if it was like Bandai, where everything is just either taped to the bottom or just left in the bottom of the box behind a cardboard filler. So let's resurrect Kakyoin from the dead, and let's take a look at me spilling over the box's contents while I'm putting him away, and him having weak knees. And there he is, ladies and gentlemen, the cherry boy himself, Kakyoin Noriaki. Thankfully, picking up all the dropped accessories wasn't that much of a problem, so let's get on to looking at the pretty boy Bishonen himself. Now, Kakyoin's face sculpt is actually pretty spot on, and I'm actually happy that Araki's personal choice colors were actually pretty much identical to the ones that he had in the anime as well as in the game, where I remember him the most. Now, there are cases, and I mentioned this because there are cases where the super action statues that came out and preceded the animated variants of the characters had radically different colors than what finally came out. For example, take a look at Joseph. Take a look at Joseph Joestar from Part 2 and Jonathan Joestar from Part 1. But in any case, I'm glad at least that Kakyoin looks fairly identical to what he looked like in the anime and in the games, minus the golden buttons. The game did omit them, but the anime did not. To be fair, the sculpt work is pretty good, and I am very glad that they actually had a lot of paint gradient for the gakusei coat that he's wearing, even though, you know, this would never be permitted in any legitimate Japanese high school. But in any case, the paint job on this thing and the sculpt work looks fine the way they are. The hands also look fine, which we'll get into when the accessories roll out, as well as his additional head. But in any case, you can really much tell that Medicos put a lot of effort into making the figure look straight as if he popped out of the manga panels, and I'm happy for that. One of my least favorite things to do in these types of reviews is to go over the articulation of these super articulated figures, especially for figures like Ultrax, which I no longer review, which I might come back to, but even with figures like SH Figuarts, the issue is that they all pretty much have these same joints. Unfortunately for Kakyoin though, he has a few unique challenges that the other figures in the other lines, for example Ultrax, do not have to overcome. So, for example, the head is actually very much limited in what it can actually do, and most of your action is going to come, at least for up and down, it's going to come from the joint in the base of the neck, mainly because the fact that the hairpiece extends for so long that it actually blots out the neck joint. If we remove the head, which of course you can, again, I am killing Kakyoin here, but I guess he is a zombie anyway. The actual head is on a pretty darn wide joint, but the problem is the sculpt of the head just prevents any form of legitimate movement out of it. It's a little difficult. It's a little easy to get the joints misaligned, which is one of the other problems with the figure. Let's move on to the arms. I am kind of a fan of how they did the shoulder cut, in which that the shoulder itself moves around, but the unfortunate problem is that even if the shoulder itself moves around, Kakyoin's arms are still extremely wonky and bizarre. One of the big things is that he can't actually raise his arms completely up, which negates a lot of the poses that he could have done in the video games. Even if you do manage to pull the entirety of the arm down, the problem is that the top joint isn't cut far enough for his arm to really raise all of that far up. Like most SAS figures, as I was informed of by my good friend RJ, they do not have bicep cuts, which is very interesting. Instead, they have a kind of 180-degree elbow, which I guess is decent. I mean, you know, the Kamen Riders do the same thing. But their elbows are actually on a swivel, so they can swivel at the elbow, and admittedly that's extremely bizarre, and I believe that's a horrible design aesthetic. Mainly because if you're rotating the arm like this, you lose about half the articulation that you would have had when the arm was straight up like that. The hands are on a nice joint, and they're actually on pegs instead of ball joints, which I actually admire Medicos for, because I always felt like that the ball joints on the SH Figuarts figures were pretty much irrelevant and unnecessary. The big thing about Kakyoin is that he's standing at this permanent hunched back pose where he is jutting his pelvis and his stomach outwards as if trying to get punched in the stomach, hint hint. So that makes for some very weird articulation. For example, when you're trying to have him do an ab crunch, he can't, number one, he can't do much of it, and number two, you have this bizarre thing sticking out of his back, so it's kind of irrelevant to even have this upper torso joint. The lower torso does not really even have a joint, it's just kind of a quick swivel, which is admittedly extremely disappointing. The skirt piece is the bane of most Scrubs existences because, you know, in terms of Bandai, they haven't been able to handle these type of skirt pieces very well. Take a look at Kamen Rider Wizard and you can see that they pretty much screwed up in every way possible. But with Medicos, they actually did a smart, because with Medicos you can actually shift the skirt upwards like so. Now, admittedly, that does take a little bit of effort, and there might be a chance that you could scrape the paint, but Medicos smartly left this part pretty much bland plastic, which is why it's good. Once we slide the entirety of the skirt jacket up, you can actually see that he is wearing a purple belt with a gold buckle, and it's kind of nice to have that there. The entire skirt swivels a little bit, so it allows you to kick the legs out. Unfortunately, it's only one at a time, so you can't really get Kakyoin to sit down. The legs themselves have a thigh cut so that it can swivel on a hinge, but it does not have a pull down thigh, so this much kick is all you're going to really get. Kakyoin's knees are admittedly extremely weird, unlike Bandai Kamen Rider figures where the lower joint right here is automatically stiffer than the upper joint, so when he's bending his leg, so when, say, Ichigo is bending his legs, the entire leg looks natural. For Super Action statues, that's the reverse, so the problem becomes that the kneecap doesn't want to follow the lower leg down, so the legs never look natural when you're bending it, you know, just out of spite. But in any case, when you do get both of them bent, it looks fairly good. It's a 180-degree bend that the camera refuses to focus us on. And finally, we have a little bit of a ball hinge for the foot. Now, admittedly, that is a very smart joint design. Unfortunately, I am not a big fan of it, mainly because it feels too much like the hand, and I would have preferred a straight-up ball joint, say, on the SH Figuarts. But again, most figures are going this trend in general. Figures like the recent the final Ultra Act releases, and the more recent Kamen Rider figures from the SH Figuarts line, like say Gaim and the Drive, are going this exact same direction. So in any case, it's fairly advanced for its time. Kakyoin here comes with a very nice set of accessories. He comes with 4 sets of hands and an additional head to replicate the sunglasses that he wore after being scarred by Undual in the show and the manga, and the games, of course. But one of the things that I find really intriguing is the fact that Kakyoin comes with way too many pointing hands, and some of them do not really make any sense. While this hand, where he looks like he is gesturing for the devil, actually does make sense, mainly because it is used to replicate his pose from when he is from the previously mentioned Gravefly battle. This pointing finger hand unfortunately makes no sense to me whatsoever. I don't think he ever did this in the show. I do not recall him ever doing this in the games whatsoever. And the box doesn't even really bother to show it off, because looking at the pictures on the back of the box, none of the poses actually show him doing the pointing finger hand thing. So it really makes no sense to me as to why this happened. And one of the big things comes out with the accessories, because these accessories actually have really poor QC. The head is actually fine. Let's swap off the head right now by removing the original and pegging on the more Neo-esque of the heads, because Neo is a ripoff of Kakyoin, of course. It's a little bit of a tight fit, a little bit tighter than the original, but it works nonetheless. And he looks, he looks pretty stunning and stylish while wearing these. But one of the big problems with these hands is the fact that some of them don't actually have a hole dug in them deep enough to fit the entire peg on the arm. And I don't know what to say about that, except that's a huge QC error, and that makes some of the hands very much a chore to put on and remove. And also, since I do not think that the Medicos plastic has the same amount of quality as, say, a Bandai figure's plastic joints, I am tending to be a lot more careful with the joints, and that is something that I recommend that all of you watch out for as well. Of course, since Kakyoin is now blind, we definitely need something to help him stand up and walk around and make poses now, don't we? Because Medicos is smart enough to include a stand with their figures. Now, the stand is actually comprised of 3 pieces, which I believe is fairly smart, because you have one side that has a hole for the arm adapter and the other side that does not. So if you purchase his stand, not this stand, his stand from the show, High Aerophant Green, you can actually have a stand with 2 of these peg holes present, so that you can pose him with High Aerophant with Kakyoin. Now, one of the big problems with this stand, of course, is the fact that it is actually fairly small. It's a lot smaller than a Tamashi stage, for instance. So doing like aerial dashing forward poses where the arms is stretched out like this, it's kind of difficult. The entire arm plugs in onto a stage based on a hexagonal hole, just like most other figures. The stand itself is fairly sturdy as far as I can tell. There has been no noticeable QC issues as of yet. And the entire assembly plugs into Kakyoin's back. That is something that I'm not a fan of, however. While the Ultra-Acts do come with an adapter to create a hole in their back so that the stand can be slotted into them, this figure doesn't. So Kakyoin perpetually has a bullet wound in his back, and I honestly don't think that is a very pleasant thing to look at. I would have preferred it if it was like Ultra-Acts, where you can actually swap the piece on and off to maintain kind of maintain a decent posture of the figure. But you get what you sow. Medicos gave us so much already. What's there to complain about? At least you have a stand. Ultra-Acts don't even have stands. Let's be realistic here. And Kamen Rider doesn't even have a hole you can put into his back. But in any case, the stand doesn't really boost much of his height, and it's fairly sturdy, so it can hold up Kakyoin no problem. He can float in the sky and look like a possessed ghost all he wants. Since Kakyoin is now blind and cannot see, let us pair him up with some of his biggest competitors in the toy market. Let's first start off with an SH Figuarts, the obvious highest quality of Bandai's highly articulated goods. We'll start with Old Ichigo, because Old Nigo is too much of a hassle to get out of his box. Unfortunately, Old Ichigo is a little bit too short compared to Kakyoin, but then again, Kakyoin was always kind of a giant among men anyway, and Kamen Rider wasn't always really known for being one of the tallest people around. At least this still works. As humans, they do look fairly in proportion, and they do look like they can, put up somewhat of a match. Of course, Kamen Rider can't fight a stand. And also, Kamen Rider actually looks better in the camera than he does in real life. Sucks to be me, he actually looks like the right color now. Next up, let's take a look at Bandai's representation of Crushed Dreams. Here is the Ultraman. Here's the Ultra-Act, Ultraman Jack. Yes, Ultra-Act is a dead line, and yes, they never made the other Dynaform. So screw you, Bandai. But in any case, Jack is a little too tall, but honestly it doesn't really matter. These are not meant to be, in scale anyway. Alongside Jack, the rest of these figures are all only here, because comedic value, and just to let you guys know how Kakyoin will mesh into your collection. Here is the Ultra Hero Series Ultraman Jack, which looks a little bit better together with Kakyoin, but not by a whole lot. Don't expect much. And finally, let's try out Ultra Monster, because why not? And this is a Ultra Monster dedicated channel, even though I've been dedicating a lot towards Pachimon too. Here is Monsarger, and of course, they don't look too bad together, mainly because Monsarger splashes in well with anything. Let us wrap up the review by putting Kakyoin in his most famous pose, because So Kana and Kurae Dio Hankei 20 meter Emerald Splash wo. Yes, my amazing Japanese is not very amazing, is it? But in any case, what do I give this figure in the end? I give it a very solid 4 out of 5. It's actually not a bad toy to pick up. Now, of course, there are a few QC problems. Mine came with a very loose right elbow and or elbow cap, I should say. The elbow cap is actually able to pop off on this figure alongside the kneecaps, in which case my left kneecap is actually very loose. But in any case, I feel like those are not very big issues, because you didn't see them pop off in the review at all, because I did fix them up a little bit. But in any case, I feel like this figure has a lot more personality than, say, the Ultrax or the SH Figuarts. It just looks more like an artistic piece than any of the other ones. Any of the other, well, say, the super articulated Ultraman or Kamen Rider figures that I own. They don't have the, this gradients in terms of their coloring, and Kakyoin, the sculpt really just never ceases to amaze me. Now, the figure might look really bad in terms of, on paper stats. The articulation is meh. The included accessories is fairly mediocre, and if anything, and the packaging is fairly flimsy. But in any case, if you actually hold the figure in your own hands, you would actually feel that it's really fun to just mess around and pose the figure around and do all sorts of weird poses from the show, because JoJo is the show of poses. But yeah, it looks bad on paper, but when you actually hold it in your hand, it's fairly incredible. Now, what's the recommended price range on this thing? Well, I was able to find this figure for below $40 and stuff. So I would recommend that to be the price range, especially because they recently did a reissue of it, so it shouldn't be that hard to find. However, if you do love Kakyoin so much, I would say that paying more is obviously okay. But if you do not love Kakyoin, which I do understand that a lot of people don't really like this character, he didn't do much when he appeared. He didn't appear for very long. He only showed up for one part, and then he got killed. So, if you don't really feel that much love for the character, you can obviously skip the thing. But if you do intend to add this as your only JoJo's Bizarre Adventure figure into this huge collection of random whatever is that, like me, it's at least fun to know that, it splashes very well into the whatever collection you happen to own, be it Ultra Monsters, Ultra Heroes, super articulated stuff. And honestly, it'll be kind of the eye catcher of the show, but then again, that's kind of what these super action statues are good for. But yeah, that's me done ranting. The final score is yet again a 4 out of 5. This is Yao9, and I will see you guys next time. Bye!